Ships and Vehicles. A-61 Mantis Gunship. The workhorse of mercenary bands throughout the galaxy, the Mantis is a two-man vectored thrust aircraft that excels in close air support roles. Highly modular in construction, the Mantis can be reconfigured as a low-altitude gunship, a fighter, a high-altitude bomber, or even a single-stage-to-orbit spaceplane that can engage enemy craft around the planet or space station. The only role that the Mantis cannot perform is that of a true deep space fighter, as it has no FTL drive. First rolled off the assembly lines in 2170, the Mantis remains in service in dozens of armies across the galaxy. It is most commonly used as air support in pitched ground battles, in a configuration that sports two pods for Inferno PKRs, precision kill rockets, and a chin-mounted M350 mass accelerator cannon. Its kinetic barriers, thermal decoy system, and electronic countermeasures suite make the Mantis far less vulnerable to surface-to-air attacks than previous generations of aircraft. Like most modern planes, the Mantis uses an Element 0 core to ease the load of the engines with a mass effect field, allowing it to take off vertically or hover in place using minimum fuel. This also gives it far greater range and speed than the helicopters and jump jet aircraft that once filled its niche. A Mantis can take off from Baton Rouge, reach Moscow in a few hours, fly a ground attack mission, and return home before having to refuel. FTL Drive. Faster-than-light drives use Element 0 cores to reduce the mass of the ship, allowing higher rates of acceleration. This effectively raises the speed of light within the mass effect field, allowing high-speed travel with negligible relativistic time dilation effects. Starships still require conventional thrusters, chemical rockets, commercial fusion torch, economy ion engine, or military anti-proton drive, in addition to the FTL drive core. With only a core, a ship has no motive power. The amount of ESO and power required for a drive increases exponentially to the mass being moved and the degree it is being lightened. Very massive ships or very high speeds are prohibitively expensive. If the field collapses while the ship is moving at a faster-than-light speed, the effects are catastrophic. The ship is snapped back to sublight velocity, the enormous excess energy shed in the form of lethal Cherenkov radiation. FTL Drive. Appearance. New space travelers ask, what does it look like outside a ship moving at faster-than-light speed? Part of the answer can be seen in a simple pane of glass. Light travels slower through glass than it does through open air. Light also moves slower in conventional space than it does in a high-speed mass effect field. This causes refraction, and the light entering at an angle is bent and separated into a spectrum. Objects outside the ship will appear refracted. The greater the difference between the objective, exterior, and subjective, interior speeds of light, the greater the refraction. As the subjective speed of light is raised within the field, objects outside will appear to redshift, eventually becoming visible only to radio telescope antennae. High-energy electromagnetic sources normally hidden to the eye become visible in the high blue spectrum. As the speed of light continues to be raised, X-ray, gamma-ray, and eventually cosmic ray sources become visible. Stars will be replaced by pulsars, the accretion disks of black holes, quasars, and gamma-ray bursts. To an outside observer, a ship within a Mass Effect drive envelope appears blue-shifted. If within a field that allows travel at twice the speed of light, any radiation it emits has twice the energy as normal. If the ship is in a field of about 200 times the speed of light, it radiates visible light as X-rays and gamma rays, and the infrared heat from the hull is blue-shifted up into the visible spectrum or higher. Ships moving at FTL are visible at great distances, though their signature will only propagate at the speed of light. FTL Drive. Drive charge. As positive or negative electric current is passed through an FTL drive core, it acquires a static electrical charge. Drives can be operated at an average of 50 hours before they reach charge saturation. This change is proportional to the magnitude of mass reduction. A heavier or faster ship reaches saturation more quickly. If the charge is allowed to build, the core will discharge into the hull of the ship. All ungrounded crew members are fried to a crisp. All electronic systems are burned out, and metal bulkheads may be melted and fused together. The safest way to discharge a core is to land on a planet and establish a connection to the ground, like a lightning rod. Larger vessels like Dreadnoughts cannot land and must discharge into a planetary magnetic field. The ship passes the charge from the drive core to the exterior armored hull, then dives into the magnetic field. As the hull discharges, sheets of lightning jump away into the field, creating beautiful auroral displays on the planet. The ship must retract its sensors and weapons while dumping charge to prevent damage, leaving it blind and helpless. Discharging at a moon with a weak magnetic field can take days. Discharging into the powerful field of a gas giant may require less than an hour. Deep space facilities, such as the Citadel, often have special discharge facilities for visiting ships. Helios Thruster Module. Intended for next-generation fightercraft, the Heat Industries Helios Thruster Module propulsion system far outpaces typical liquid hydrogen-liquid oxygen reactions that power a frigate's maneuvering thrusters. By using metastable metallic hydrogen, the Helios boasts a fuel that burns at far greater efficiency than liquid H2O2. Navigators can execute the numerous small course corrections inherent to any long-distance travel without fear of exhausting the ship's fuel supplies. This net gain extends to forward impulse as well. A ship powered by antiprotons can coast temporarily using the Helios to reach an inferior but highly sustainable speed. Such efficiency lowers antiproton consumption, a constant concern for any warship. When a Helios-propelled ship must refuel, however, it typically relies on a large carrier or nearby planetary factory to synthesize the metallic hydrogen. This process uses extremely dense mass effect fields to create the metal under pressures of over 1 million Earth atmospheres, an activity most safely done while planetside. While that process may seem like a drawback compared to skimmer ships that can gather hydrogen and oxygen from anywhere in the universe, the combat superiority of the Helios' maneuvering capabilities is often a worthwhile trade-off. The same efficiency that allows for microburn course correction can power rapid bursts of motion. Once a pilot becomes used to the ship's new energetic responses, she can easily put the ship wherever and at whatever angle she desires. Space Combat. Combat Endurance. Heat limits the length and intensity of ship-to-ship combat. Starships generate enormous heat when they fire high-energy weapons, perform maneuvering burns, and run onboard combat electronics. In combat, warships produce heat more quickly than they can disperse it. As heat builds within a vessel, the crewed spaces become increasingly uncomfortable. Before the heat reaches lethal levels, a ship must win or retreat by entering FTL. After an FTL run, the ship halts, shuts down non-essential systems, and activates the heat radiation gear. Combat endurance varies by ship design, and by the battle's location. Battles in the deep cold of interstellar space can go on for some time. Engagements close to a star are brief. Since habitable worlds are usually close to a star, battles over them are frantic. Space Combat General Tactics. Shells lofted by surface navies crash back to Earth when their acceleration is overwhelmed by gravity and air resistance. In space, a projectile has unlimited range. It will keep moving until it hits something. Practical gunnery range is determined by the velocity of the attacker's ordnance and the maneuverability of the target. Beyond a certain range, a small ship's ability to dodge trumps a larger attacker's projectile speed. The longest ranged combat occurs between Dreadnoughts, whose projectiles have the highest velocity but are the least maneuverable. The shortest ranged combat is between Frigates, which have the slowest projectile velocities and highest maneuverability. Opposing Dreadnoughts open with a main gun artillery duel at extreme ranges of tens of thousands of kilometers. The fleets close, maintaining evasive lateral motion while keeping their bow guns facing the enemy. Fighters are launched and attempt to close to Disruptor Torpedo range. Cautious admirals weaken the enemy with ranged fire and fighter strikes before committing to close action. Aggressive commanders advance so cruisers and frigates can engage. At long range, the main guns of cruisers become useful. Friendly interceptors engage enemy fighters until the attackers enter the range of ship-based GARDIAN fire. Dreadnoughts fire from the rear, screened by smaller ships. Commanders must decide whether to commit to a general melee or retreat into FTL. At medium range, ships can use broadside guns. Fleets intermingle, and it becomes difficult to retreat in order. Ships with damaged kinetic barriers are vulnerable to Wolfpack frigate flotillas that speed through the battle space. Only fighters and frigates enter close knife fight ranges of 10 or fewer kilometers. Fighters lose their Disruptor Torpedoes, bringing down a ship's kinetic barriers and allowing it to be swarmed by frigates. Guardian lasers become viable weapons, swatting down fighters and boiling away warship armor. Neither Dreadnoughts nor cruisers can use their main guns at close range. Laying the bow on a moving target becomes impossible. Superheated thruster exhaust becomes a hazard. Space Combat Planetary Assaults. Planetary assaults are complicated if the target is a habitable garden world. The attackers cannot approach the defenders straight on. The Citadel Conventions prohibit the use of large kinetic impactors against habitable worlds. In a straight-on attack, any misses plow into the planet behind the defending fleet. If the defenders position themselves between the attackers and the planet, they can fire at will while the attacker risks hitting the planet. Successful assaults on garden worlds hinge upon up-to-date intelligence. Attackers need to determine where the enemy's defenses are, so they may approach from an angle that allows them to fire with no danger of collateral damage. Note this is not necessary for hostile worlds. Once control of orbit has been lost, defensive garrisons disperse into the wilderness. An enemy with orbital superiority can bombard surface forces with impunity. The best option for defenders is to hide and collect reconnaissance in anticipation of relief forces. Given the size of a planet, it is impractical to garrison entire conquered worlds. Fortunately, colonization efforts tend to focus on building up a dozen or fewer areas. Ground forces occupy the spaceports, industrial facilities, and major population centers. The wilderness is patrolled by unmanned aerial vehicles and satellite reconnaissance. If a defender unit is spotted, air mobile rapid deployment units and satellite artillery are used to pin down and destroy them. Space Combat Pursuit Tactics. Dependent on light, sensors cannot detect objects moving at faster than light speeds. No ship can be detected at interstellar ranges. Detection at interplanetary ranges suffers from light speed lag. Observers see ships not where they appear to be, but where they were when the light bearing their image left them, minutes, hours, or days before. To counteract light speed lag, battle fleets surround themselves with spheres of screening and scouting frigates. Pursuers cannot detect ships and directly intercept them. Instead, pursuers track where objects were, where they were heading, and at what speed they were moving. Such data reliably predicts an object's future location and for pursuit along its light-lagged wake. Ships trying to evade pursuit follow erratic zigzag courses, requiring pursuers to make stops to update their projections. Space Combat Trans-Relay Assaults. The crucial choice for any attack through mass relays is how to divide the fleet for transit. The accuracy of a relay's mass projection depends on the mass being moved and how far it's going. Any long distance and/or high mass jump will see drift. That is, a ship may be hundreds or millions of kilometers from its intended drop point in any direction from the relay. Distance can't be chosen by admirals, but a relay is told to how much mass to transit. For example, if told to move 1 million metric tons of mass, the relay will scan the approach corridor, find 4 250,000-ton freighters, and transit them together, maintaining their relative positions. The commander has the option of moving his fleet as one large coherent formation that may be wildly off position, or breaking it up into smaller formations that will be individually closer to the intended attack point, but could be widely dispersed. Conservative assault doctrine holds that fleets should be moved en masse, maintaining concentration of force and reducing the chances of collision. The only time it is reasonable to split up a formation is during blockade running. Starships, carriers. All races provide their fleets with organic fighter support. Cruisers fit a handful in the space between the interior pressure hulls and exterior armor. Dreadnoughts have a hangar deck within the hull. Humans, who had only recently graduated from surface to space combat, were the first to build ships wielding fighters as the main armament. In fleet combat, carriers stay clear of battle, launching fighters bearing Disruptor Torpedoes. Fighters are the primary striking power of the ship. If a carrier enters mass accelerator range of the enemy, things have gone very wrong. It is possible to recover and rearm fighters during combat, though most carriers seal the flight deck and try to stay out of the way. The flight deck is essentially a corridor through the armor and into the heart of the vessel. A single well-placed torpedo is enough to gut a carrier. Alliance carriers are named after great leaders, artists, and intellectuals from human history. Starships, crew considerations. Cabins give each individual 10 cubic meters of space. On larger vessels, private rooms are common. As ships get smaller, the number of crew packed into a single wardroom increases. Asari prefer shared spaces even on large vessels, while Krogan territorial instincts make it impossible for them to cohabitate even on the smallest ships. On smaller vessels, hot bunking is the norm. Crew members assigned to different watches share the same bunk. When one gets off duty, he wakes up the person in the bunk. While that crewman is on duty, the first gets his ragtime. Spacecraft compartments can be isolated by airtight doors in case of decompression. The cinematic vision of explosive decompression is fiction. Hold compartments either take enough damage that occupants are killed instantly, or leak slowly enough that they are able to reach protective gear. Compartments are equipped with emergency life support apparatus. Fireproof plastic bubbles with air bottles. Small when stowed, LSA comfortably accommodate one individual inflated. Damage control procedure cuts off ventilation to burning compartments. Without oxygen to consume, fires die in seconds. The compartment is repressurized afterwards for crew recovery. Mass effect fields create an artificial gravity A-grav plane below the decks, preventing muscle atrophy and bone loss in 0G. Large vessels arrange their decks perpendicular to their thrust axis. The highest decks are at the bow and the lowest at the engines. This allows A-grav to work with the inertial effects of thrust. Ships that can land arrange their decks laterally, so the crew can move about while the vessel is on the ground. Warships normally turn off their A-grav systems during combat, reducing the heat generated by systems and increasing combat endurance. To provide a point of reference for navigating in 0G, floors are painted a different color from the walls and ceiling. Starships, cruisers. Cruiserweight starships are the standard combat unit encountered away from large naval bases, the poor bloody infantry of most fleets. Nimble scouting frigates have neither the punch nor the stamina to stand up to serious combat, and the mighty Dreadnoughts are a strategic resource, carefully hoarded and committed to the most critical battles. Cruisers perform routine independent show-the-flag patrols in settled systems and lead flotillas of frigates in small engagements, such as pirate suppression campaigns. In major fleet engagements, cruiser squadrons support the Dreadnought battle line by screening their flanks against enemies attempting to maneuver for a main gun bow shot from their vulnerable broadsides. Alliance cruisers are named after cities of Earth. Starships, Dreadnoughts. The ultimate arbiter of space warfare, the Dreadnought employs millions of tons of metal, ceramic, and polymer in the projection of firepower against an enemy vessel of like ability. No sane commander would face a Dreadnought without a Dreadnought of his or her own. A Dreadnought's power lies in the length of its main gun. Dreadnoughts range from 800 meters to 1 kilometer long, with main guns of commensurate length. An 800-meter mass accelerator is capable of accelerating one 20-kilogram slug to a velocity of 4,025 kilometers per second, 1.3% of light speed, every 2 seconds. Each slug has the kinetic energy of 38 kilotons of TNT, enough to destroy the infrastructure of a mid-sized city and kill 500,000 people. Because of air friction, planets with atmospheres do not feel a slug's full devastation. Atmospheric drag reduces impact force by 20% per Earth atmosphere of air. At present, the Turian fleet possesses 39 Dreadnoughts, the Asari 20, and the Solarian 16. Each of the Human Alliance's 8 Dreadnoughts is named for terrestrial mountains. Everest class, Everest, Fuji, Elbrus. Kilimanjaro class, Kilimanjaro, Taishan, Shasta, Aconcagua, Orizaba. Starships, fighters. Fighters are single-pilot combat small craft. They are lightweight enough that they can be economically fitted with powerful Element 0 cores, making them capable of greater acceleration and sharper maneuvers than starships. Kinetic barrier shields changed starship battles from short, vicious bloodbaths to extended, indecisive slugging matches. Only the main gun of a Dreadnought could punch a mass accelerator slug through the barriers of an opposing Dreadnought. This changed with the development of the fighter-launched mass Disruptor Torpedo, a short-ranged weapon that can penetrate kinetic barriers to destroy their projector assemblies. Starship Guardian defenses must be overwhelmed through swarm tactics. Fighter groups can take heavy casualties, pressing their torpedo attacks home. Once fighter-launched torpedoes have crippled an enemy's barriers, the mass accelerators on frigates and cruisers can make short work of them. Interceptors are a type of fighter optimized to attack other fighters, with no ability to damage starships. Interceptors are used to screen friendly units from incoming fighter attack. Starships, frigates. Frigates are light escorts and scouts, often possessing extensive GARDIAN systems providing anti-fighter screening for capital ships, and crewed with a squad of marines for security and groundside duty. Unlike larger vessels, frigates can land on planets. The most important role filled by frigates is reconnaissance. Sensors, unlike ships and communications employing the mass effect, are limited to the speed of light. Therefore, a stationary observer can detect a vessel a light year away only when its light arrives a year later. Because faster-than-light attackers arrive before defenders can attack them with luminal sensors, attackers can always surprise defenders. For defense, fleets surround themselves with spheres of scouting frigates, scanning for enemy ships and transmitting warnings to the main body. Frigates achieve high FTL cruise speeds because of their high-performance drives. They also have proportionately larger thrusters and lighter design mass, allowing them greater maneuverability. In combat, speed and maneuverability make frigates immune to long-range fire of larger vessels. In fleet combat, frigates are organized into wolfpack flotillas of 4 to 6. Wolfpacks speed through enemy formations, hunting enemy vessels whose kinetic barriers have been taken down by fighter-launched Disruptor Torpedoes. Wolfpacks circle-strafe vulnerable targets, using superior speed and maneuverability to evade return fire. Alliance frigates are named for great battles in human history. Starships, heat management. Dispersal of heat generated by onboard systems is a critical issue for a ship. If it cannot deal with heat, the crew may be cooked within the hull. Radiation is the only way to shed heat in a vacuum. Civilian vessels utilize large, fragile radiator panels that are impossible to armor. Warships use diffuse radiator arrays, DRA, ceramic strips along the exterior of the armored hull. These make the ship appear striped to thermographic sensors. Since the arrangement of the strips depends on the internal configuration of the ship, the patterns of each vessel are unique and striking. On older ships, the DRA strips could become red or white hot. Dubbed tiger stripes or war paint by humans, the glowing DRA had a psychological impact on pirates and irregular forces. Strip radiators are not as efficient as panels, but if damaged by enemy fire, the ship only loses a small portion of its total radiation capacity. In most cases, a vessel's DRA alone allows it to cruise with no difficulties. Operations deep within a solar system can cause problems. A ship engaged in combat can produce titanic amounts of heat from maneuvering burns and weapons fire. When fighting in a high-heat environment, warships employ high-efficiency droplet heat sinks. In a droplet system, tanks of liquid sodium or lithium absorb heat within the ship. The liquid is vented from spray nozzles near the bow as a thin sheet of millions of micrometer scale droplets. The droplets are caught at the stern and recycled into the system. A droplet system can sink 10 to 100 times as much heat as DRA strips. Droplet sheets resemble a surface ship's wake through the water. The wake peels out in sharp turns, spreading a fan of droplets as the ship changes vectors and leaves the coolant behind. Starships, Quarian Liveships. There are few wide open spaces in Quarian spacecrafts. Liveships are the exception. Each ship is a massive hydroponics facility, growing thousands of tons of genetically modified staple crops under artificial light and in highly enriched soil. The surface of a liveship is studded with docking bays so as many shuttles as possible can distribute the foods throughout the flotilla on a daily basis. When received, the crops are sterilized with radiation, ground up into nutritious pastes, and pumped into Quarian suits through feeding tubes. In return, waste products that could be used as fertilizer or compost are returned to the liveships through an efficient, if odorous, recycling program. Liveships do not hold animals. The Quarians consume a vegan diet, driven not by ethics but by practicality. Captive animals require living space and consume large amounts of water and plant matter. The Quarians cannot afford such an inefficient resource-to-calorie ratio, to say nothing of a live animal's disease or allergen potential. As a result, when the flotilla arrives in a star system where life is based on the same dextro amino acids that the Quarians consume, pastes based on various animal proteins fetch highly inflated prices, and the vendors are typically mobbed by Quarians wanting a new taste sensation. The sickness that often follows these binges is treated much the same way as hangovers are in human culture, painful but part of the overall experience of excess. Starships, sensors. Light lag prevents sensing in real time at great distances. A ship firing its thrusters at the Charon relay can be easily detected from Earth, 5.75 light hours, 6 billion kilometers away. But Earth will only see the event 5 hours and 45 minutes after it occurs. Due to the light speed limit, defenders can't see enemies coming until they have already arrived. Because there is FTL travel and communications but no FTL sensors, frigates are crucial for scouting and picket duties. Passive sensors are used for long-range detection, while active sensors obtain short-range, high-quality targeting data. Passive sensors include visual, thermographic and radio detectors that watch and listen for objects in space. A powered ship emits a great deal of energy, the heat of the life support systems, the radiation given off by power plants and electrical equipment, the exhaust of the thrusters. Starships stand out plainly against the near absolute zero background of space. Passive sensors can be used during FTL travel, but incoming data is significantly distorted by the effects of the mass effect envelope and Doppler shift. Active sensors are radars and high-resolution LiDARs, laser detection and ranging, that emit a ping of energy and listen for return signals. LiDARs have a narrower field of view than radar, but LiDAR resolution allows images of detective objects to be assembled. Active sensors are useless when a ship is moving at FTL speeds. Starships, thrusters. A Mass Effect drive core decreases the mass of a bubble of space-time around a ship. This gives the ship the potential to move quickly, but does not apply any motive power. Ships use their sublight thrusters for motive power at FTL. There are several varieties of thruster, varying in performance versus economy. All ships are equipped with arrays of hydrogen-oxygen reaction control thrusters for maneuvering. Ion drives electrically accelerate charged particles as a reaction mass. They are extremely efficient but produce negligible thrust. They are mainly used for automated cargo barges. The primary commercial engine is a fusion torch, which vents the plasma of the ship's power plant. Fusion torches offer powerful acceleration at the cost of difficult heat management. Torch fuel is fairly cheap. Helium-3 is skimmed from gas giants and deuterium extracted from seawater or cometary bodies. Propellant is hydrogen, likewise skimmed from gas giants. In combat, military vessels require accelerations beyond the capability of fusion torches. Warship thrusters inject antiprotons into a reaction chamber filled with hydrogen. The matter-antimatter annihilation provides unmatched motive power. The drawback is fuel production. Antiprotons must be manufactured one particle at a time. Most antimatter production is done at massive solar arrays orbiting energetic stars, making them high-value targets in wartime. The exhaust of fusion and antiproton drives is measured in millions of degrees Celsius. Any vessel caught behind them will melt like wax in a blowtorch. Any long-duration interstellar flight consists of two phases, acceleration and deceleration. Starships accelerate to the halfway point of their journey, then flip 180 degrees and apply thrust on the opposite vector, decelerating as they finish the trip. The engines are always operating and peak speed is attained at the middle of the flight. Weapons, ablative armor. A warship's kinetic barriers reduce the damage from solid objects, but can do nothing to block Guardian lasers, particle beams, and other forms of directed energy weapon, DEW. The inner layer of a warship protection consists of ablative armor plate designed to boil away when heated. The vaporized armor material scatters a DEW beam, rendering it ineffectual. A scaffold is built around the interior pressure hull, with sheets of ablative armor hung from the structure. Ships typically have multiple layers of armor separated by empty baffles, spaces often used for cargo storage. Cruisers, which lack the internal space to fit dedicated fighter hangars, store the shipboard fighter complement in the baffles. It is not unknown for enlisted crew to build illicit alcohol distilleries in some obscure corner of the baffles, safe from prying eyes. Weapons, Disruptor Torpedoes. Disruptor Torpedoes are powered projectiles with warheads that create random and unstable mass effect fields when triggered. These fields warp space-time in localized areas. The rapid, asymmetrical mass changes cause the target to rip itself apart. In flight, torpedoes use a mass-increasing field, making them too huge for enemy kinetic barriers to repel. Because extra mass retards acceleration, torpedoes are easy prey for defensive Guardian weapons, and must therefore be launched at extremely close range to be effective. To prevent damage to the parent craft, torpedoes must be cold-launched, meaning they are released before their thrusters ignite. Aligning with its target's trajectory, a fighter releases a torpedo and immediately thrusts away, while the torpedo continues to coast towards its target. After the fighter is clear, no more than a second after launch, the torpedo activates its mass field and thrusters away from the fighter and towards its target. Torpedoes are the main anti-ship weapon used by fighters. Launched at point-blank range in ripple-fire waves, they are reminiscent of the ancient Calliope rocket artillery launchers, thus their popular nickname, Callies. By saturating defensive GARDIAN systems with multiple targets, at least a few torpedoes will get through. Weapons, GARDIAN. A ship's General Area Defense Integration Anti-Spacecraft Network, GARDIAN, consists of anti-missile, anti-fighter laser turrets on the exterior hull. Because these are under computer control, the gunnery control officer needs to do little beyond turn the system on and designate targets as hostile. Since lasers move at light speed, they cannot be dodged by anything moving at non-relativistic speeds. Unless the beam is aimed poorly, it will always hit its target. In the early stages of a battle, the GARDIAN fire is 100% accurate. It is not 100% lethal, but it doesn't have to be. Damaged fighters must break off for repairs. Lasers are limited by diffraction. The beam spreads out, decreasing the energy density, watts per square meter, the weapon can place on a target. Any high-powered laser is a short-ranged weapon. GARDIAN networks have another limitation: heat. Weapons-grade lasers require cooldown time, during which heat is transferred to sinks and radiators. As lasers fire, heat builds within them, reducing damage, range and accuracy. Fighters attack in swarms. The first few will be hit by GARDIAN, but as battle continues, the effects of laser overheat allow the attackers to press ever closer to the ship. Constant use will burn out a laser. GARDIAN lasers typically operate in infrared frequencies. Shorter frequencies would offer superior stopping power and range, but degradation of focal arrays and mirrors would make them expensive to maintain, and most prefer mechanical reliability over bleeding-edge performance where lives are concerned. Solarians, however, use near-ultraviolet frequency lasers with 6 times the range, believing that having additional time to shoot down incoming missiles is more important. Lasers are not blocked by the kinetic barriers of capital ships. However, the range of lasers limits their use to rare knife-fight range ship-to-ship combat. Weapons, Javelin. The Javelin is an experimental close assault weapon fitted on a handful of newer Alliance warships. It consists of a rack of 2 or more disposable Disruptor Torpedo tubes bolted or magnetically slung onto the exterior of a ship's armored hull. Fired on converging trajectories, the torpedoes detonate in a precisely timed sequence that allows the warhead's dark energy to resonate and thereby magnify the resulting space-time warp effects. Like fighter-launched torpedoes, Javelins are cold-launched for safety reasons, though they use a different approach. Resembling old-fashioned submarine torpedo tubes, Javelin torpedoes compact in individually sealed tubes filled with compressed inert gas. Opening the front of the tube causes escaping gases to push the torpedo into the vacuum, releasing a puff of crystals around the mouth of the tube. After completely clearing the tube, the torpedo ignites its thrusters. Javelin mounts are most often fitted on swift frigates, which enter knife-fight torpedo ranges as a matter of course. Javelins may also be fitted on heavier ships for short-range engagements such as trans-relay assaults. They are particularly useful in this role for Dreadnoughts, which cannot lay their main guns on close-range targets. As missile weapons, Javelins are subject to highly accurate defensive GARDIAN fire. They must be launched in large numbers and at short range to have any chance of hitting their target at all. Weapons, Mass Accelerators. Mass accelerators propel solid metal slugs via electromagnetic attraction and repulsion. A slug lightened by a mass effect field can be accelerated to extremely high speeds, permitting previously unattainable projectile velocities. The primary determinant of mass accelerator's destructive power is length. The longer the barrel, the longer the slug can be accelerated, the higher the slug's final velocity, and therefore the greater its kinetic impact. Slugs are designed to squash or shatter on impact, increasing the energy they transfer to its target. Without collapsibility, slugs would punch through their targets while inflicting only minimal damage. Rather than being mounted on the exterior, Starship guns are housed inside hulls and visible only as gun portholes from outside. A ship's main gun is a large spinal mount weapon running 90% of the hull's length. While possessing destructive power equal to that of tactical nuclear weapons, main guns are difficult to aim. Because ships must be able to point their bows almost directly at their targets, main guns are best used for long-range bombardment fire. Approximately 40% of the hull's width, broadside guns inflict less damage and can be mounted with greater numbers and more flexibility. The modern human Kilimanjaro-class Dreadnoughts mount 3 decks with 26 broadside accelerators apiece, for a total salvo weight of 78 slugs per side, firing once every 2 seconds. However, mass accelerators produce recoil equal to their impact energy. While the mass effect fields suspending the rounds mitigate the recoil shock can still rattle crews and damage systems. Special Vehicles, the Hammerhead. M44 Hammerhead. The M44 Hammerhead infantry fighting vehicle is a highly maneuverable Mass Effect assisted armored vehicle. Using 3 solid fuel rocket thrusters instead of wheels, the Hammerhead hovers over the battlefield at up to 120 km per hour, allowing it to maintain formation with swift armored units, skim across calm water, and even leap terrain obstacles. Backup microboosters guarantee locomotion, so even destruction of 2 main thrusters leaves the vehicle capable of full mobility. The Hammerhead retains most features of interplanetary fighting vehicles: an airtight interior, 360-degree kinetic barriers, and a guided missile system ensuring accuracy during even aggressive maneuvering. Its electronic countermeasures extend to laser detection, chaff, active thermal masking, and ground-penetrating weapon-sniffing radar. The Hammerhead's navigation control emulates that of tanks, so tank drivers can operate Hammerheads without additional training. Factory-issue Hammerheads therefore have no altimeter or similar sensors and are best used at the standard cruising altitude, 2 meters off the ground.